Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Cumberland Planning Board meeting for Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Everybody's here except for Josh. And next item is approval of minutes for the May 17th, 2022 meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I move that the minutes be accepted as presented.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? All abstained? Okay, 2 abstentions. Okay, under staff site plan approvals, we had 1 minor staff site plan review, Carla took care of. Moving on, item E, minor change approvals, there were none. And item F, hearings and presentations. The first item, a public hearing for preliminary major subdivision review for Evergreen Estates, a 10-unit residential development on a 5.69 acre parcel located on Old Gray Road, tax assessor map U21, lot 5E, in the Village Medium Density Residential Zoning District. Owner, SVR LLC, applicant NV Construction, representative Craig Burgess from Sebago Technics. So before we hear from Craig, Carla, do you want to give us some background to this, and especially maybe talk about the discrepancy of the overlays, the minimum lot size, if you could explain that, please?
When the conservation subdivision ordinance was put in place, provisions of the types of subdivisions, traditional cluster and conservation, new language was put into the ordinance, and some of it wasn't cleaned up. And so there was a language that was left in that talked about minimum lot size for this type of a subdivision that really is not applicable. I think if you read Natalie's explanation, because this is essentially one lot with multiple units in it, it doesn't need the per lot minimum lot size. So it's a little complicated, but.
And as I understand it, Natalie's explanation required no changes to the existing ordinance in order to let this move forward.
Right, because of the fact that it was one lot.
Okay. And on the waiver, we had to deal with this last week on the lot in town here, and just confirm for me that we're not setting a precedent potentially for other subdivisions and projects if we grant this waiver.
Right. What the town attorney has told me repeatedly over the years is that the planning board doesn't set precedent, only a court can set precedent. So what the board does with regard to a particular application is in and of itself for that project. And when the motion is made, it's always with the word due to the unique circumstances of the site. And that's exactly what's happening with this one. There are a couple of unique circumstances that I think make it a reasonable waiver to grant, but I'll let the applicant's representative explain it to you.
Okay. And specific to LD 2003 that's coming down the pipe next year, this also we wouldn't be shooting ourselves in the foot by granting these sorts of waivers that in the future could exist still.
I don't see how it would. The law is not into effect until July 1st next year. And between now and then, we will be working on our ordinances. So anything that happens before July 1st is going to become moot when the law goes into effect.
Okay. Anything else from the board before we move to Craig?
Good question.
Nothing. Okay. Take it away.
Good evening. My name is Craig Burgess with Sebago Technics, here representing NV Construction. So the proposed project will involve the creation of 5 duplexes or 10 total units. It will be a condominium project in the VMDR district. Site access will be from the westerly side of Old Gray Road. So to get to Old Gray Road, it's a very sharp turn off of Gray Road, as I'm sure most of you are aware. So as part of this project, but not submitted as part of this preliminary application, the applicant has agreed to improve this portion of the roadway all the way between the site entry and Gray Road to meet public road standards. Additionally, the intersection will be realigned to tie into Gray Road at more of a perpendicular 90 degrees. So it will greatly improve safety at this intersection. The subject parcel did at one time include this parcel here. I've been working with the applicant now for some time on this site, and we cut the lot at right here, and this portion of the old subject parcel is still owned by the current owner. The proposed development will include approximately 0.7 acres of new impervious, which will be a new 20-foot private roadway extending into the site to serve all 5 units, some additional guest parking, a concrete dumpster enclosure which will have fence on all sides. I understand that a detail was not provided for that, but that will be included as part of the final application, as well as a walkway around the entire roadway and cul-de-sac. The utilities will mainly be, the underground utilities will extend in from Old Gray Road. The site will be served by 2 new wells and 2 new subsurface disposal systems. The disposal systems will be located in this portion of the parcel, the westerly portion. And these were fairly complicated to design because of high bedrock in this location, visible to shallow bedrock. And I'm going to go into the waiver request, but that was one of the constraints of this site, was the visible to hot, shallow bedrock in the westerly portion of the site. There was also a wetland that was delineated in the southerly portion. So this wetland extends to I believe, a stream over in the southwesterly corner, which is off-site. So that wetland is contiguous with that stream. So those are the 2 main site constraints on this site. We did look at also site distance along Old Gray Road, and there was a fairly limited stretch where we could achieve site distance. It was about a 50 to 60 foot stretch along Old Gray Road. So it was very critical to have the access road at this location here. All the stormwater, I shouldn't say all, but a majority of the stormwater from this development will be redirected to drain to a detention pond in the southeasterly corner for detention. Because this project isn't proposing more than 1 acre of new impervious, DEP permitting requirements do not apply here. So at this time, we're only planning on providing detention of runoff, but the detention basin will not provide any formal treatment of runoff. As part of the preliminary packet, we did provide a traffic memo which shows that the peak hour trip is about 6 in the PM peak hour. There are a total of, I believe, 72 total trips from this development in one day. There was a lot of back and forth with the town prior to the submission, and we did evaluate possibly obtaining land to go straight out to Gray Road, but it was actually found that the site distance at this location over here to the south of where Old Gray Road currently intersects, the site distance was worse. So we're back to trying to re-improve this road, the public road, to serve this project. The waiver we're requesting tonight is for the 75-foot perimeter buffer. I did discuss the visible to shallow bedrock in this location, which really limits any development in this area here. Additionally, this wetland here really limits the ability to push that development further south. And of course, the site distance, we're really tied to this location here for the site distance. So for those reasons, we are requesting a waiver for the reduction of, partial reduction of that 75-foot buffer. We do plan on supplementing that reduced buffer along Old Gray Road with a robust landscaping plan. We did prepare a landscape plan that was part of this submission, but that will be, we'll add more plantings so that it decreases, so that it forms more of a visual buffer from Old Gray Road. Additionally, the buffer up along the north, within the deed for the lot conveyance, there was an understanding that as part of this project, we would plant some additional trees, plantings in this area. And with the final plan application, we do plan on doing that. There is a considerable amount of cut in this area so the duplexes are actually sunken down low. So with the plantings here and the cut in this location, we don't anticipate that these will be highly visible from this residence at this location. We did receive some comments from the peer review engineer. Overall, they're pretty minor in nature. We do plan on addressing them here as part of the final application, but nothing really major that would require any type of redesign. I did review the memo that was sent out, and we do plan on responding to some of the comments that were brought up. Overall, I think it's just supplemental info that will be provided as part of this final application. With that said, I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Go ahead, Peter has some views.
Peter, go ahead.
I'll direct this to Carla. Are the improvements that they want to make to the road and to the intersection with Route 100 satisfactory for the town, the DOT, and anybody else involved?
They haven't been formalized or submitted to us for review and for our town engineer to review. The DOT, I don't even know that they're going to have a role in this. They've pretty much said to me early on, we don't care. The way it is now is the way it is, and if we do anything to improve it, that's great. I don't know, Craig, if you've had any discussions with them. I'll certainly double check on that before, this gets
So
submitted.
for final, we would have an opinion from the town that it was
Yes.
okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And there was a lot of stuff, so it might have been in there, but did it make sense to our peer engineer with regard to, with the wetland issues that reducing the buffer, the wetland issues basically trumped any minor reduction of the butter? In other words, getting the wetland squared away was more important than the buffer.
I don't know that the engineer responded to that.
Okay.
I'll make sure for the final approval that he concurs. I know he will, but I can't tell you that it's in.
But
in
it
the
sounds
application.
like Josh isn't here, and I would defer to him, but it does sound like it does meet the, at least from on the surface, the unique circumstances, it would appear to me.
Yeah, I think it does, and, I don't know that Craig mentioned it, but to the rear of the parcel is the turnpike, correct? So there's no abutter there,
Yeah.
and he's going to buffer along Old Gray Road, and that will be fine. And again, there's nothing really straight across from that. It's the side yard of a residence, and there's nothing. And the other buffer is going to be, the other property line is where the seller's home is, and they've already have written into the deed that this will have a planted buffer.
But
So
it
I-
also sounds like that the topography is, was mentioned as working in their favor, that we're not going to have to plant ponderosa pines or anything
Yeah.
to make this thing unique. That's all I have. Thank you.
Paul?
just a couple things. Could you define partial regarding the buffer? What do do you have a foot?
Yeah, so
Partial or-
this plan shows it, so really along this portion of Old Gray Road and along that lot line from the lot conveyance, that would be the reduced buffer.
To what though, is what I'm asking? To what measurement, roughly?
There was a slide, right, that you had that showed the two differences somewhere.
I'll try to pull that up.
I'm just interested in knowing what, if we're going to approve a waiver, what exactly, are we approving?
Pretty good size.
So along Old Gray Road, I don't have a measurement on this, but it appears to be somewhere, what's highlighted are the setbacks that were defined within that zone. So we can treat the typical building setback as the vegetated buffer and add more robust plantings for visual screening at these two locations that are highlighted in yellow here. The plan that I had pulled up here shows, this is the grading plan, and it shows how much excavation will occur in this area. So there's more than a 10-foot grade change here, as well as there is some mounding and grade change in this location here. So this mound could be planted with much more landscaping, and the top of this excavation could be planted as well.
I couldn't tell from the drawing, but like how long, again, you're asking for a waiver of the 75 feet. So not only how long is this change that you're asking for, but how roughly are you asking for 30 feet? Or I just couldn't tell from the materials I had.
I can't,
And maybe you don't know, and
yeah, so I believe this front setback is 25 feet, and the side is 10 or 15, if Carla could confirm.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think
all right.
page 14 of the packet, I think, kind of has that the green area is the 75-foot buffer that is going to be maintained. And when you compare that to where everything is situated, the condominiums, you can kind of get a feel for what we're looking at in terms of
Yeah,
a reduction in the
my-
buffer on
My
those.
page 14 doesn't have that.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
kind of in line with this, even though this is a preliminary, don't we normally have the engineer's comments?
We did. They were not put into this. I thought they were cut and paste in here.
Well, I read through the whole thing. Did everybody see them? Like regarding the stormwater, was everything, you said everything was okay with the engineers.
It is, and you're right.
Yeah. I just don't
Sure
remember
why
seeing
it's,
them.
why it didn't cut and paste in here, but he was fine. He actually had very few comments. They were addressed by Craig.
And maybe would they be included in the final?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll have you have the final.
If you'd like, I can skim through them. I have them right here.
How many are there?
There's 4 comments.
Okay, yes, could you please?
Yes, the first one is just to provide an estimate of the total project cost with a financial capacity letter. The second would be to include all the different sections of the stormwater management report. I believe we accidentally did not include some of the sections that were part of that, so we'll include all those sections with the final application.
Okay.
There was a request for a note on the plan for the wetland delineation. So the wetland delineation was completed in 2021, as well as the vernal pool assessment, and there were no vernal pools found on the site. And then the fourth comment was addressing the old Gray Road stretch between the site entry and Gray Road to bring that up to public roadway standards.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm presuming all of, like Carla's comments, you would address in the final. She had 4 different comments. And Dan Small's comment regarding the fire aspect will be addressed. Okay, thank you.
To Paul's point, I guess, are you asking for the buffer waiver to go to 0 in those areas? Or are you asking them to be the same as the setbacks?
So is the buffer, is that a no disturb buffer that requires natural vegetation, or can it be planted with new trees, new shrubs for visual screening.
The latter.
Okay, so in that case, we could completely plant this, the typical setback requirements within that zone as shown with the yellow highlight on this plan.
Okay, so we should just spell that out, that that's the waiver that you're asking for, and it looks like the front and the sides are two different numbers, so we should
Yes.
just mark that and note that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wondered, excuse me, but before we grant a waiver, should we have the language being a little more specific, or are we okay with this pretty general? Again, I'm looking at the diagram, but it's still a little unclear. It'll be interesting also if we have public comment that addresses the need for something that we're not seeing here. So
Okay.
something to think about.
Other questions from the board? Ann?
Yeah, do we need to do that waiver tonight? Or-
You have to talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do we need to do the waiver tonight?
What do you think, Carla?
Probably.
It sounds like we do have a definitive answer. It's the amount of the setback is what the buffer will be, and that amount will be planted, and we'll have a landscape plan for final review. So I think it would be helpful for to get preliminary approval tonight for that waiver to be granted. Otherwise, the project really can't go forward because it's not meeting a key ordinance requirement.
And the verbiage of the waiver could be to match the current setbacks, right?
Yes.
Just one, that seems reasonable to me. Just one other thing, though, regarding where you are adding buffer or reducing setbacks, what is on the other side of that? I mean, we may hear later about it, but are there any residences? I know I've seen the list, but are there people that are going to be affected by this reduced setback?
On this side, the prior lot owner was aware of the project that NV Construction wanted to do, which is why in the deed it was spelled out to put a row of plantings along this property line, which we plan to do. Where the other reduced buffer is at this location, there is a residence right at the corner of Gray Road and Old Gray Road. That residence is fairly close to the right-of-way line, approximately right here. So these two units are consistent with how close they are to Gray Road. If not, they're further back than the house here. So it's really the two homes here. As you go down, this is fairly well wooded on this side of Gray Road, on the opposite side. But there's just that one home at this location where my cursor is.
Okay, thank you.
Carla, I know it gets a little sticky sometimes. So the buffer that's required and is in the deed in the land to the north, we have no purview over that, right? So if they opted not to do that, we have no authority to enforce that, and the
Right.
person to the north would have to come after them for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to do it. I was surprised when I was reading through the deed to find that. But I can see why that property owner would do it that way, because he has control over it, rather than delegating it to the town's review process to put the plants in. Planning board could be redundant and still require plantings on our side, this side of the property line, but
Would it be outside of our purview to make it a condition of approval to honor that deeded plantings on the next piece up?
I don't know how you would do that because it's not going to be shown on the subdivision plan.
Gotcha. Okay,
It will be part of the plan set, so we did submit a landscape plan. So this shows some trees along Old Gray Road now, but did not include that row up here. So with the next iteration as part of the final application, we will include a buffer, a planted landscape buffer along this property line, as well as supplementing this buffer with with more shrubs and more plantings for that visual screening.
And is that agreement with the previous landowner, those plantings, are they supposed to be on this property or theirs?
That's a good question. It really wasn't, I don't believe, detailed in the deed, but we would put it on this parcel here. Unless, of course, I'll try to reach out to them to see if they would prefer it on their property. In that case, if that's, I would get some type of written statement from them saying that.
Okay. All right, Bridget?
Well, I believe that we could enforce the vegetation buffer within the width of the waiver that we approve, right? So, and then I just pulled this up here. It is 25 feet from the front and 15 feet from the side. So I would feel comfortable with a motion that included those set values and then enforcing the vegetation buffer within 15 feet and 25 feet.
Okay, makes sense to me.
Question, would that be a standard condition of approval or part of the waiver?
What was just said,
Yes.
I think could be either way. I will tell you that I'm looking at the deed language, and I think it does clarify or state, Craig, that it's going to be on the seller's property. It says, shall plant trees of a consistent variety along the division line between the premises and the remaining land of the sellers as needed to provide a dense tree buffer. Distance and spacing to be determined by the type of trees planting. Oh, I misread that. I was thinking it was going to be on the remaining land. So it's between the two, and you're right, we need to clarify that. If the board would prefer it be on this project's side, I think that can be accomplished within the setback.
But as a standard condition of approval, as far as the vegetation, would seem to me to make more sense than making this waiver request something that a Philadelphia lawyer would have to understand.
I'm sorry, ask me again what you
No,
mean by
as
this.
far as this vegetation thing.
The buffer.
It would seem to make more sense to have it in as a standard condition of approval than loading up this waiver thing with tons of language.
Peter, couldn't we maybe grant the waiver and on the referring to meeting the condition of approval? So we grant the waiver, period, but it has to meet the condition of approval.
Sounds great to me, and you probably have a Wheaties box top degree rather than a law one, right?
Neither.
Okay, so,
But just one other thing. So I think you can tell it would be important to all of us to see what Bridget was talking about on the final. So we need to hear from the public, but so that we see what you actually are going to do and, specifically.
Okay.
That would be very helpful.
agreed, Paul. Anything else from the board?
Oh, I have a question.
Ann?
Yeah. Do the Route 100 design standard, they do not approve? Okay.
Anything else? Okay. So I will open the public hearing at this point. Anybody that would like to speak on this matter, come up, introduce yourself.
James Banfield, and we're at 10 Old Gray Road, the little property that's across the street from this. As long as that has the vegetation, meets the setbacks, we're in favor of it. So that's making sure there's that vegetation just to protect us and them. That's the biggest thing from our standpoint. And then we'll talk about the road, because obviously that's going to potentially affect us. So that's the only other concern, but obviously that's not brought up today. So
Very
that's it
good.
from our side.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say that you're in that little triangle?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the board. Further questions of Craig or Carla before we move on? Okay, seeing none, I think I am waiting for a motion on a waiver.
I'll move, due to the unique circumstances of the site, that we grant a partial waiver of the 75-foot buffer requirement, subject to the, and Paul, you were saying
So the condition of approval that
subject
that we'll
to
be adding.
standard conditions of approval that might be added.
And we want to spell out that it's 25 feet on the front and 15 feet on the side,
Yeah,
correct?
my guess is Carla will have that, so I second that motion.
Okay. Discussion. Are we happy with that, Christina? The way we said that?
I am. Are you, Carla?
Okay. All right, discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Okay, unanimous, thank you. All right, so I think at this point, we move on to the findings of fact, which I will find on page something. Okay, findings of fact. Pollution. There are no floodplains on site. A subsurface investigation confirmed that the soils and subsoils are adequate to support waste disposal, and passing test pits were confirmed. A nitrate evaluation was conducted that meets the requirements of the state of Maine and the Cumberland Subdivision Ordinance. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Sufficient water. The lots will be served by 2 drilled wells. A hydrogeologic assessment dated April 13th, 2022 was provided, which states that the proposed subdivision will have adequate water available and will not adversely affect the supply of water to adjacent properties. The town engineer has reviewed and approved the findings of the hydrogeologic report. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Municipal water supply. The subdivision will not utilize public water. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Erosion. An erosion and sedimentation control plan that includes housekeeping procedures for maintenance has been submitted, and the plan has been reviewed and approved by the town engineer. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Traffic. A traffic impact assessment dated March 29, 2022 was submitted that shows that the project is estimated to generate 6 trips during both the AM and PM peak hour periods. A traffic movement permit from MDOT is not required. There are no high crash locations in the area, and there is adequate site distance at the exit from the subdivision. The application states that the development is estimated to generate 6 vehicle trips in the peak AM and PM hours. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Sewage disposal. There will be 2 septic systems for the 10 units. The location of the systems and depiction of the location of passing soils tests have been provided, and a hydrogeologic assessment was provided that shows the proposed septic systems will provide for adequate sewage disposal without impacting well water quality. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Municipal solid waste disposal. The site plan shows the location of a 12 by 12 dumpster enclosure. A private waste hauler will be used. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Aesthetic, cultural, and natural values. Letters are on file from state agencies indicating that the proposed subdivision will have no adverse impact on any of the above features. The board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Conformity with local ordinances and plans. The plans have been reviewed and approved by the town planner, the town engineer, and town department heads. Additional information is required for final plan submission. At this point, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Financial and technical capacity. Financial capacity, the applicant has submitted a letter dated March 29, 2022 from Gorham Savings Bank stating that bank has reviewed Mr. Salvo's financials and the details of the proposed project and finds that Mr. Salvo has the financial capacity to fund and/or obtain financing for such project. An estimate of values shall be submitted with the final plan. Technical capacity is evidenced by the use of the professional technical consultants, including a professional engineer, a licensed land surveyor, a landscape designer, hydrogeologist, and a wetland scientist. In addition, a statement from the developer was provided that gave an overview of past projects completed in the greater Portland area. The board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Surface water outstanding river segments. Wetlands were delineated by Gary Fullerton, LSS of Sebago Technics in November of 2020. There is one mapped wetland location in the southeast portion of the site. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Groundwater, the 10-unit residential subdivision, which will utilize private well water, will not adversely affect the quantity or quality of groundwater. A hydrogeologic assessment was provided that shows the proposed septic systems will provide for adequate sewage disposal without impacting well water quality. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Flood areas. The development is not located within a 100-year floodplain as shown on FEMA flood insurance rate map 23016200010B-0015B. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Stormwater. A stormwater management report dated May 2022 was included in the application. The proposed development has been designed to manage stormwater runoff through best management practices approved by the MDEP. Runoff discharging from the site will be at or below pre-development conditions for the 2, 10, and 25-year storm events. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Freshwater wetlands, one wetland area was mapped and is shown on the plan. The development of the 10 condominium units has been designed to avoid wetland impacts to the maximum extent possible and will involve the filling of 2,558 square feet of wetland, which is below MDEP permitting thresholds. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. River, stream, or brook. There were no streams identified on the site. Based on the information provided, the board finds that the standards of this section have been met. Okay.
I have a motion. I move that we adopt the findings of fact as written and read.
I second the motion.
Any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Okay, so, do I hear a further motion
Could,
or proposed conditions of approval? Should we go over
I
those?
have a motion, but could I ask Carla to read the seventh condition of approval?
Yes. I also want to let you know that the first 6 are really conditions that go with final approval. They're listed there. I think for tonight, for granting preliminary approval, you just need the one condition of approval. And what I've written out is that a waiver of 25 feet on the front and 10 feet on one side has been granted by the planning board with the condition of approval that a robust buffering and planting plan shall be submitted for final plan review.
Carla, it's 15 feet on the side, please.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds good to me.
I would move that as the condition of approval to
Right.
be done this evening.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we wrap it all together, I guess, if we can?
It's been 9 years that I've done this, but I will move that we approve the additional condition of approval as prepared by the town planner, and move to approve the project with the standard and proposed conditions of approval.
What are we missing? That catch it all?
Sounds good.
Mhm.
I second that.
Okay, Paul seconds it. Did we miss anything? No. Discussion? All right, all in favor? Unanimous,
Thank you.
thank you.
I'm curious when you expect to be back.
Sebago Survey Department is currently trying to complete that right-of-way survey and the existing conditions of Old Gray Road. I anticipate that will take about a month, and then we have to go through the design of it. So probably about two months or so.
Okay, moving on to item F2, a site plan pre-application conference. The Grange Hall at Longwoods Preserve to be located on 2 adjacent parcels totaling approximately 61.56 acres with a contract zone agreement in the Rural Residential 1 zoning district, tax assessor map R03, lot 6A, and map R03, lot 13 through 76, Longwoods Road. Owner Synergosity LLC, Representative Jeffrey Reed from Sevian Maher Engineers. And so Carla, you want to give us a little bit of history? And this is not an actionable item or a public hearing yet tonight, correct?
That is correct. This is what's considered, or in the ordinance, as a pre-application conference for a site plan. The applicant doesn't have their plans fully designed yet. We've met with them several times to go over the plans, tweaking them so that they are ready for submission. I'm not sure if they're coming in next month. I think that might have been the intention. Yeah, fingers crossed. This is a project that has been going through the contract zoning process with the planning board recommendation of the council. The council adopting the contract zone about a month ago, and now it is coming to the planning board for the actual site plan review, and that is what we're beginning that process tonight.
Okay. Before we hear from Jeff, anything else from the board for Carla? Okay, Jeff, take it away.
So great. So my name is Jeff Reed. I work with Sevian Mahar Engineers right here in town. And I am here tonight on behalf of Alex Timpson and Synergosity to present this project, the Grange Hall Pub at Longwoods Preserve. Now, the Grange Hall Pub at Longwoods Preserve is located on a 61.5 acre parcel, identified as Lot 6A and Lot 13, tax map R3. As Carla had mentioned, we've been through, and actually some of the members of the board here are probably familiar with the project. I think there are a couple of new ones since then, but through the contract zone procedure. And we're now at the point where we're looking for feedback from the board. We've carried the design forward a little bit. We kind of wanted to get this in front of you folks so that we could run a couple of things by you, get your feedback, get your comments, so that we could then kind of finalize our site plan application and come back and see you. Hopefully we'll be able to do that and get that turned around within the next week or so that we can come see you next month. We've already gotten quite far with our plan set and our application package. So just as a refresher, the lot fronts to Longwoods Road on the northeast. Is just south, so there's an existing CMP power corridor to the north. To the northwest, we have the east branch of the Piscataqua River. The southwestern property line actually abuts Falmouth and some existing farmland on that side. And there is some existing residential development to the southeast. We did have a fair amount of feedback from property abutters, adjacent property owners, through the contract zone procedure, and our plan design has tried to take into account most of their concerns, all of their concerns. And I think that this developer has kind of gone above and beyond to try to make sure that he's going to be a good neighbor and keep everybody happy. A unique feature of this development, and very non-traditional, of the 61.5 acres for these two combined parcels, 55 of this are going to be dedicated conservation area. It's going to be a combination working farm and trail system. We've been working with the Sheboygan Cumberland Land Trust to maintain that area. The hope and the intent is the sections that are currently field will be part of the working farm. The areas that are wooded are going to remain wooded, and we're going to provide some parking and some access to different trailhead locations to a trail network that will be going through that 55 acres. What's left is about a 6.5 acre, what we're calling the development parcel. That is the meat of this application. This is where all the work's going to happen. And this is going to house the project that we're working on right now. Essentially, this is going to be a just under 3,500 square foot restaurant with 120 seats. The restaurant's going to have a large outdoor patio and terrace. So 60 of those seats are going to be permanent, full-time, indoors. The other 60 are going to be seasonal. They'll be outdoors on the terrace. We have calculated the parking and the traffic and everything else for worst-case scenario, so full use at 120 seats, just to be conservative and make sure that we're being responsible. There was a 43-space parking lot adjacent to the structure that will account for basically the town requirements for a restaurant like this are 1 parking space per 3 seats, I believe, with a little bit extra for staff. We're also including 16 parking spaces not adjacent to the building, but along the access road on the way in. There'll be 8 new parking spaces at each trailhead that we're going to be putting in for the trail network. And again, based on the ITE manual, which is the traffic engineering manual, and the anticipated use, worst case scenario, we think that 8 spaces at each should accommodate the users in town here. The project will be served by a private well, which is already drilled, has been tested. Water quality is good, and the flow is good. So we're in good shape there. In addition to that, similar to the project before us, we're going to have a combination of 2 septic systems to serve this. Each will be under 2,000 gallons per day. And the details of the routing on that are going to be tied to the architect and the actual building design and kitchen and wastewater versus bathrooms and that sort of thing. But those will be figured out and routed. Also, by splitting that up into 2 smaller systems as opposed to 1 larger one, the overall impact is distributed a little bit more, spread out, so there's less impact on the groundwater. The site will be accessed via an improved, basically the same location as the existing driveway that goes up to the farmhouse in the property. It will be improved to current, to road design standards per the town. It's going to be widened to 20 feet. It'll include additional 2-foot gravel shoulders. There will be ditches down either side, as well as stormwater management. The road itself will be roughly 1,300 square feet. So to put things into perspective, as you're looking at this from Longwoods Road, you're not going to see much besides the road going up over the hill. The restaurant, the parking area are all on the other side of the rise, behind the existing farmhouse. So the visual impact here should be minimal. The developer plans at some point, I mean, they're pretty high hopes for this, in addition to being a farm-to-table restaurant and a brew pub. They want to be involved with the community, a community center, so there's hopes that they will be able to host events, maybe farmers markets, weddings, maybe some corporate events, that sort of thing. So they're planning on applying for the farm-based special events permit. It's not going to be a regular item. They're going to be limited to 8 events per year, but that is something that they're considering at this point. For those of you who have been involved with the process through, the facility will include some live music, mostly indoors, not loud, blowout concerts. The intent here is mostly background for dining, acoustic, electric, Nothing that would, nothing that you would have to talk over. It's going to be very low volume, but to kind of add to the character and the nature of the place. There will be some additional permitting required for this. We've submitted our main DOT driveway entrance permit, and we're hoping that we have that when we return with the site plan application. If we do not, we'll include the letter that we had written to them that outlined the traffic calculations and everything else. We were pretty well below, I think, peak hours. We tried to combine the absolute worst case traffic loading in every situation. We looked at the restaurant, we looked at the trail parking, as well as some employee stuff, and when we took the worst of this and the worst of that, we were still not even close to, 100 hours and 100 trips in the peak hour. So we don't anticipate they're going to come back and say we need a traffic movement permit for this. I think the driveway entrance permit should be sufficient. We're going to have less than an acre of new impervious area. I believe we're looking at roughly 40 to 41,000 square feet. So by current Maine DEP standards, we will have permitting, but we're not going to have, it's not going to be a traditional stormwater permit per Chapter 500. We'll have to submit a Maine DEP stormwater permit by rule, which is a pretty brief and abbreviated permit application, usually submitted, and barring anything unforeseen, within 14 days you have your permit in hand. We're planning to have that as well before we come back to see you for site plan review. Of course, I've just talked right over my whole presentation and didn't flip through all the slides, but I guess what I can do, this is the site plan that was included in your application packets. And it pretty well outlines most of the items that I have discussed. I mean, you can see the restaurant here. The terrace will be facing the open field down at the side. The parking will be behind. And then the access road that comes up and winds up through. There'll be some potential driveway reconstruction here just for a safety feature for the farmhouse. We are outlining some additional plantings along between the farmhouse and the restaurant, and there will be a couple of other smaller islands and berms on this side just to provide some visual separation. The plan for the farmhouse is that it's in hopes that the farmer that's going to work this land will be using that, either as his base, as his office, as his residence. That hasn't been decided yet. It'll depend on whoever comes in to do that work, but that's the hope. That's basically it. Again, you can see here, we've got 8 spaces down here, 8 spaces here to connect to the trails, which run all the way. They include this side over here, around the back of the field, all the way out into this wooded area here. These locations are conceptual, okay? We have done some wetlands work out here. We know that there are no vernal pools, there are wetlands, but we had surveyed an area basically in the development parcel and then 250 feet outside. That corresponds to the DEP critical terrestrial habitat, so that if there were a vernal pool 250 feet away, could it possibly impact us on this parcel? We didn't do the whole 55 acres because it's a big project. And wasn't critical and necessary to the development of this piece. Any questions?
What specifically were you looking for from us tonight? Like, were there specific areas?
Well, there were a couple of areas, and honestly, one of the things that kind of got me thinking about it was the previous presentation, the landscaping and the buffering and that sort of thing. We're not proposing we're not anticipating a formal landscape plan with this project. We're, over 1,000 feet from the closest road. We're over the top of the hill. You know, our closest abutters are to the southeast over here. You know, we're maintaining a 300-foot setback, self-induced setback with trails from their houses, just as a courtesy.
It's kind of a modified 200 feet, but
Yeah.
it's a pretty big buffer,
Yeah.
even for the trail.
That was one of the things that, that kind of kicked back from the contract zone discussions. It was something that was very important to them, so, and it was easy for us to accommodate.
Town council didn't say anything about the setback. I proposed it just to be a neighbor to my neighbor. It's not in the contract zone.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess one of the questions I would have, I mean, the only landscaping that we would be providing with this project would be some of the screening between the farmhouse. It'd be internal. I mean, do you see the need for a formal landscape plan and a landscape architect for this sort of thing?
I don't.
I personally don't, but can you confirm for me I was in some of the earlier workshops, and at one point, besides the farmhouse, the existing farmhouse, there was talk of another residence or building. Is that going to happen, might
lot.
happen?
Yeah, the lot lines that we show right now basically don't include that.
Okay. All right. I would think that would be an important part of your other question as far as landscaping
Sure.
goes. Yeah.
Sure.
Paul?
It's a fascinating project as we've seen in prior meetings. Just three questions. Are you working with the lands and conservation on the trails and that part of the project? Or have you?
So, me personally, no.
No, I mean,
But the
will
developer
it-
will be working with the Cumberland Shabig Land Trust.
Okay,
Chris Cabot is the admin over there.
yeah, okay.
And they've been involved with the negotiations on this and the conversion of the conservation land, and they'll be involved with the trail work with the developer.
So the second question is, you mentioned seasonally, there'd be 60 indoor, 60 outdoor.
Right.
Any idea on how much staff that is?
I think they were thinking of between 8 and 10.
Because you mentioned there'll be parking somewhere for staff, but, I mean, it just seems like
In the
43.
main parking lot, yeah.
Because 43 doesn't sound like, I know the contract zone, I think that's probably meets the contract zone requirement, but if you have 120 people, sometimes people show up in 2 cars, and
Right.
anyway, that seems like that could be an issue. I
So-
know you had 8, you had additional,
Right, so what we had planned for that and what we're, so in the event that we have a special event, right, we have more than 43 cars there, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There are areas in the field adjacent to that the ditches and the swales are gonna be gentle enough that you can, ride through, basically park in the field if you have to. I mean, that's not gonna be the plan for regular operations. And, staff has to go park out in the field, and everybody else has a place closer too, but,
okay. And the other, I'm curious, it seemed to me that in the workshop and maybe in here, that the farmer, so you're going to try to find a farmer that's going to buy into the project, is that correct?
I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work. I think it's gonna be through the Conservation Trust and, whether I don't think they're actually gonna own anything, but whether they lease or whether there's an agreement where they can come in and work the land and live there and that sort of thing. I don't know what that's gonna look like just yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So last we talked on that topic, you had said, though, that the restaurant could live independent from the farm
Right.
portion of things, and if
Right.
you never find a person that's willing to do that, that doesn't affect the restaurant and its ability to function.
Correct. That's why we're presenting this as the Grange Hall Pub as opposed to that other piece.
And I
And
think
separating the parcel out
it would be great to find that person, but I think it's important to know that
Without
they
a
can
doubt.
live
Yep.
separately.
independently.
Okay. Peter?
Just a couple of things. I come to this, this is actually the first time that I've reviewed it. And I mean, there's nothing really that jumps out at me with regard to just the, the proverbial 30,000-foot thing. It looks like it's a fine fit there, and as long as all the i's are dotted and t's. But I do have a process question, though, probably for the town planner. My understanding is that there were improvements made to the road that were far and above filling in potholes, and some question whether the town gave permission or not. And I guess my concern is that we're making improvements to the site without a formal site plan, but I may be wandering into territory that I don't belong.
I was gonna say, I can respond to that. I mean, that was a flat-out mistake. It was a misunderstanding on the developer's part. And he thought it was okay. When he received notification that it was not, he stopped immediately, stabilized the site, and has not gone back and done any more work. And no more work will be done until permit approvals are in hand. And that was an unfortunate mistake.
Okay, well, everybody makes mistakes. That's why they put erasers on pencils.
That's the first I've heard of that. Can you elaborate, Carla? Is this an issue at this point, or?
It's a non-issue at this point. It happened several months ago. A.H. Grover was asked to come in to do some minor grading because it was very much a rutted, potholed, old farmhouse driveway, basically. And the communication between the code officer and the developer and the site work person wasn't clear. And it happened, and it was reported right away that something was happening there. It was on a Friday afternoon. Bill Shane jumped on it, went down, and the work was stopped, and there's no need to put it back the way it was, because it's pretty much what it's going to have to be anyways. But it was unfortunate because, as Bill Shane said, that's not getting the project off on the right foot that this happened. But
So the developer thought of it as maintenance, sort of, to bring it up to usable condition, is that right?
That was the thought. And it ended up being a little bit more than that. And again, it was a mistake. And like I said, when Bill came out, it stopped, and everything was stabilized, and it's been sitting there ever since.
And Bill Longley is satisfied at this point?
yes.
Okay. All right, Bridget?
Just confirm that what the road material is. Is it going to be paved or unpaved?
So it will, kind of halfway in between. So the plan is to have a gravel base that's going to meet the town standard. Usually for a road like this, it would be 15 inches of base gravel with another 3 inches of type A gravel, and then pavement on top of that. What we're proposing is reclaimed asphalt travel surface. So we'll have the 15 inches of base, we'll have 3 to 4 inches of reclaim, and that'll be the wearing surface. And that will be the surface for the access drive, that will be the surface for the parking area, and basically all the wearing surfaces on the project. And it's a little bit of a combination between, it's not quite paved, but it's better than gravel.
I'm curious about a couple of things. First, going back to the farm, I'll go to that first. Could you kind of point out what areas are actually going to be cultivated
So
and how much?
my understanding, and maybe actually this, so this is a figure that we had used when we were doing the contract zone work, and you may have seen this during the workshop. It's changed slightly since here. This was, the chairman actually had pointed out, we actually had a leg that was coming out here for potential future development and that sort of thing that is not there anymore. The farmstead area was outlined here as the area immediately surrounding the farm. My understanding is that any of the the existing field, kind of even, or if you look over here, maybe difficult to see, restaurant here. This is one of the septic systems. So anything kind of, on this line forward in the field,
I'm sorry, I can't see
can you
that.
see my cursor there?
No.
Okay. So there's a restaurant here, and there's a septic bed here, and there's a line that comes across here. So basically everything up this way, with the exception of anything in the CMP power border easement,
Okay.
would be available.
So, I'm sorry, up, could you do that again?
So here,
Yeah,
and then forward. That's CMP.
okay,
Okay. So anything from here to here, this field,
okay.
would be available for farming.
Great,
Okay, so that's quite a few acres, or?
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many that is, but,
16 acres when you add up the other.
okay. So 16 acres.
Okay. Okay, and then that would be up to the farmer.
That's correct.
Whoever takes it over as to
Right.
what would be
Right.
a typical planting. Okay, then my other question is about the brew pub.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that, are you planning to make beer there?
I believe that's the intent, is we're gonna make it on-site, or we're gonna import?
Have a small, should I get in front of the microphone?
You should come up and
Yes,
introduce
please.
yourself so that you can, yeah.
We may have a small amount of distillery that goes, but it won't be a major microbrewery pub like, Oxbow.
Okay,
We were going to focus on having about 8 beers on tap from Maine's best, so to speak.
And you would be servicing just your restaurant, is that correct?
Correct.
okay, because I understand that with a distillery,
No,
there are some significant discharge issues and so on.
Sure.
Okay.
right, no, we won't, this will not be a microbrewery or a winery for that
Ah.
matter.
Okay,
Thanks, Alex.
thank you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think in the contract zoning, we specifically excluded marijuana growing. Is that correct, in the contract?
I don't remember if
zone?
that was in the contract zone or
I
not,
can
but
address that. What we agreed is that we would follow the current and the future zoning for the RR1 zone. So whatever applies currently or in the future
Right.
regarding marijuana
Yep,
or agriculture
yep,
to the RR1 would be applicable to this contract zone.
right, okay, I remember that. yeah.
And one thing I just want to be clear, in the contract zone, I think there is language which we will submit as part of this final submission for a future residential dwelling in the woods, but there's no plans to construct that anytime in the next 5 years. So, and that is described in the contract zone. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Okay, thank you.
we will provide a copy of that language with our application submission.
Okay. Anything else from the board? No. I think it's a really neat project.
Yeah, thank you.
Flags, concerns?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Did you have
Okay.
other specific things that you wanted to run by us?
Well, I've had some conversations with Carla on, we're probably gonna have a few waiver requests. I don't think that they're anything, major, market study, high-intensity soil survey, that sort of thing.
Hydro?
Hydrogeologic study. I think those are all fairly common requests. I'm not looking for a determination by any means tonight, but, those are items that I guess we would be looking for support when we actually come forward with the application. Outside of that, any other items would have been addressed with the contract zone language. I don't think that there are any major items that we're looking to bring forward. Even in terms of, like I said, DEP, I mean, the project has been designed to be fairly friendly. I think we might have along one edge of the terrace, maybe 200 feet of wetland impact that we'll stay out of if we can, but, I mean, minor grading and that sort of thing. So it should be a pretty straightforward project.
Okay.
Now that we've got a lot of the hard work behind us.
All right, great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, could
Yes.
you each just unplug and replug your microphones? We're getting a little feedback.
And Jason, I mentioned to you earlier, I apologize, but I have to leave the meeting at this time, and I have read and will continue to read the material that will be presented next.
Okay,
So,
thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Has this happened before?
Whitney said if we get feedback, to
Oh.
unplug and replug, but I'm still hearing feedback.
Yeah, I'm still hearing it. Should we move on?
What about Josh's? Did you try Josh's?
It's not that. Oh, there you go. It's Jeff's fault. Good night.
What about swapping it out? Can we,
It's not like those.
No.
It plugs in at the base of the microphone.
Steal Josh's? Is it the same as these?
No, it's not the same. No, you wanna, I think we can still hear you, so.
Okay, so we'll move on anyway. F, oh, it's a grounding issue. You hold on to it? Nope,
nope.
maybe not. Okay. All right, anyway, we'll move on. Hopefully, people can still hear. Item F3, Stormwater Report. This is an annual report to the Planning Board regarding the MS4 Stormwater Program as required by the Maine DEP permit, presented by Christy Rabaska of Integrated Environmental Engineering, Inc. She'll take us through this. There's no actionable items tonight, though I guess there are some changes that we'll need to make coming forward. So Christy, take it away.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief, but we do have some important information to cover. So I have assisted the town of Cumberland in compliance with their stormwater permit for, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. I was hoping maybe that would help with the static. For quite a few years now, I think 8 years on my own. And the two ordinance changes that I'm going to discuss or present to you tonight coming up required by this stormwater permit are one for erosion and sedimentation control, and we have about a year to get those ordinance changes through. And the second set of ordinance changes are related to low-impact development standards, and we have 2 years to get those ordinance changes through. So I'll give you a preview for those tonight. We'll talk a little bit more about the requirements and why we have to do this, what specifically in the stormwater permit is requiring us to do this. I'll give you a preview of the low-impact development pieces, but I will mostly focus tonight on the erosion and sediment control. And I do have a few questions for you at the end, but I didn't have any proposed motions or anything, so I don't know if maybe the next planning board meeting we could prepare a proposed motion, but have a little discussion about it tonight. So we'll see how we do at the end. So I have a list of questions. I will be providing you with some specific examples of the changes that have to be made, how those changes will affect the Cumberland ordinances, like which sections of the Cumberland ordinances need to change, and then the discussion will be around the best method to adopt this, so it's kind of a general preference maybe by the board, so. So the permit in particular is called the general permit for stormwater discharges from municipal separate storm sewer systems. So it's the storm drain system, and it is about the very kinds of developments that you guys, saw tonight and review all the time. It's the storm drain system, which includes the outfalls, the ditches, catch basins, drain manholes, everything. So the town's been regulated by this stormwater permit for the discharges into the town's water bodies since 2003. These permits come out in 5-year increments, and except for the last one, which there was quite a bit of discussion and many iterations of the last permit. It took us 5 additional years to get that, not us, but the main DEP, 5 additional years to get that finalized. So we do have a new permit that will be starting July 1 of 2022, so this year. The new permit starts, and I've been working behind the scenes with staff to write a stormwater management plan, a 5-year stormwater management plan to address all those specific requirements. The permit itself is about 30 pages. Our stormwater management plan, which is available on the town's website, is about 120 pages to describe how it is we're going to do that, how we're going to address all these requirements. So for those of you who are not that familiar with the permit itself, the town became regulated basically because of the U.S. Census designation back in 2003. So U.S. Census takes a look at population density. They now also, since 2010, started looking at impervious area. And as soon as you get people living in close proximity, you get the developments like you're reviewing tonight, and you start to get pollution building up and runoff, contaminating water bodies. So high potential for pollution means you get regulated by this stormwater permit. So your regulated area might be a little difficult. It's shown in pink. Let's see if my mouse works here tonight. Yes. So the pink area, everything to the, basically the north, the Yarmouth side of Tuttle Road and Blanchard Road. The 2020 census does not yet apply, but it will on the next permit cycle. So I like this graphic from the National Security Administration. It just shows, these developed areas. It just shows a lot of different kinds of pollutants. Oil and grease from cars, the brake dust. People don't even think about all the brake dust that goes down. Gasoline, pesticides, fertilizers. The stormwater permit addresses all of these, but in particular, construction sites. So construction sites and post-construction sites. So all of these pollutants build up and get released to the water bodies when it rains. So the permit affects almost every aspect of municipal operations. Public Works takes care of most of the program, but so they coordinate with Cumberland County to do some public education. That's going to be around pet waste this year, and public participation. They'll have some cleanups going on. Public Works takes care of mapping the storm drain system and doing inspections on it, but I'm here for Planning Board tonight because we're going to talk about the construction runoff control that's part of this permit and the post-construction runoff control. So erosion sediment control for construction sites, low impact development after construction. And then Public Works also takes care of this pollution prevention, good housekeeping. They, all the street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, those kinds of things. And again, this is the one that we have 2 years to get through. So, but we do have this interim milestone that is September 1, 2022 that we're gonna have to address. We have a submittal to the DEP that, basically the way the permit language is written, it says we have to submit a model LID ordinance to the DEP by September 1, 2022. But actually, the Portland area communities have been working on this model ordinance for about a year now because we've known for a while it had to happen. So I have a draft for you, and that's what I'll present tonight is what the Portland area communities are proposing for some of these low impact development strategies. So after we do this interim submittal, September 1, the DEP will post it for public comment, and then they'll get back to us by November 1 of this year as to which of those strategies we have to implement in the Cumberland ordinances. So I have a list already that we'll go through, and Carla and I'll present that to you guys well before, probably July, hopefully. And then after November 1, when you know what your specific list is and looks like, we'll have until 2024 to get that implemented. So what the current list looks like right now, well, we've been working on this model ordinance for about a year now. We received grant funding last year for it under the Maine Coastal Program. We've been working on it. There's been a technical expert panel, people from UNH, Stormwater Center, and planners from around the state and Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission. And it is actually, we just finished it up this week. It's going into legal review by Jim Katsafikis, just the listing of the standards. And so the listing, you guys, do you need me to review the definition of low-impact development? Okay. Is that a no from, okay, Carla knows, okay. So the listing, this is basically what it looks like. So the listing, the way that our permit was written, we have a number of low-impact development measures that we have to address, and we have to embed some performance standards directly into the ordinances that will address each of these concepts or measures. So the first one is minimize site clearing, right? You want to not just put grass everywhere, you don't want to clear everything. So we have some submittals that will try to protect sensitive areas. Actually, we modeled a lot of it after your conservation subdivisions, so that should be fairly nominal editorial for you guys on the low-impact development. So protect a lot of the sensitive areas, just like you're doing with conservation subdivisions. Require that all developments show the limits of disturbance on the plans and then on-site during construction. And then restrict all storage movement to those limits of disturbance. And I'm not sure those are specifically embedded in your ordinance right now, but they really help a lot when you're getting out there for enforcement. And some of these seem a little funny, but all the folks on the committee and the technical experts were like, these are things that could really help to improve water quality and protect natural areas. One that's a little bit heavier lift for everyone, and it will be for the developers also, is to protect the natural drainage system by requiring the use of the Main Stream Smart principles for crossings. This would apply to sites that disturb 1 or more acres of land. So I didn't see a development tonight in the 2 developments that I saw that were going to do a stream crossing, but both of those would have triggered this. And so the inverted culverts that are embedded with the naturalized bottoms to promote fish passage and, protect the benthic organisms of the streams, instead of the, kind of hanging culvert that has been a classic design in the past. So it will be a little more costly for developments, and it's something that we will have to carefully consider before we decide that that's something that the town of Cumberland would like to adopt for its sites. A couple of the other measures, I'm not sure I need to go through all of these. I think what will happen is we'll probably have a staff meeting and to discuss these and put a proposal together for you, and probably come back to planning board in another month or so to discuss all the details, just in the interest of time. But there is a new infiltration requirement. There'll be some changes to parking space standards and minimum parking standards, if you so believe that those would benefit water quality in the community, and you decide to adopt them, and they're consistent with the rest of your ordinances. And then I think a couple of the biggest ones are that you would be requiring treatment of any road runoff, sidewalks, peak overflow parking, and basically impervious areas and developed areas for any site that disturbs 1 or more acres of land. So as I listened to the 2 proposals tonight, the first one, the 10-unit subdivision, they were only going to create 0.7 acres of impervious cover, so they don't need a DEP permit, and they're putting a detention site, they're putting a detention pond on, which doesn't have any water quality treatment associated with it. It's just a volume control device. So that site would now have to also provide water quality treatment in the form of rain gardens or a biofilter, under drain soil filter. So it would be a little more significant and definitely more protective of the small stream that was to the north of the property, so. And the infiltration standard, also up here in item 3, is important because many of our streams, as these developments get constructed, the general groundwater infiltration and the base flow to the small feeder streams tends to dissipate a lot with the impervious cover, and then you get the big flash flooding going in. So infiltrating will be important, as well as providing treatment to make sure that the water's clean when it gets to the groundwater. So a couple of snow storage things. So, and then a few more here. And again, I won't go through all the details of them, but it's a pretty dense document. We have a couple of documents that we'll have you read. One's the rationale document for the things that we agreed upon in the committee. That's kind of basically, you'll have a checklist of items. We do have to address each of the 10 measures that are listed on the left with some form of performance standard, but we can make some changes to it. And we can just, basically, we need to provide some concepts to the DEP by September 1. So not a lot of detail, but.
Christie, I have a general question. Are the changes that are going to be asked of the town, anything that the planning board has any discretion over? I mean, are we just going to be providing what we need to do, and the planning board will make a motion to adopt these ordinance changes?
So for this piece, you will have some discretion. Some of the discretion will come in the form of, does it conflict with standards that you currently have? Or is it not appropriate for a specific zoning area? Like, would you only want to have, you already have your conservation subdivision, which only applies to a couple of zones. And I think you have very good reason for why you decided to promote conservation subdivisions in those zones. And that is probably the zoning area that you will want to adopt most of these. So you'll have not only the content and which specific standards and how those standards are going to be embedded, but which zones they would apply to. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
It's a lot.
There's a lot of detail here, a lot of technical requirements that typically planning boards don't get involved in. That's what staff does.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, I'm sure they're all wondering what's going to be asked of us with this,
Yes.
okay?
So that's my next slide. So you will get a little, this was very quick, because this is the piece I just kind of added in at the end, because I knew we were wrapping things up, and I wanted to at least have the planning board understand that there are going to be discussions going on in the background for staff around this, like you and I and Bill Shane and Bill Longley will be reviewing all those performance standards in detail, and I'm imagining that we will provide a recommendation letter to the planning board with an additional presentation about what we think you ought to do and why. Yeah, and that, so that'll happen. But if you would like a little more detailed presentation, I'll be giving a separate webinar, and I'll take a whole hour to discuss the different performance standards and the advantages and disadvantages of each of them on July 14th. At 11 a.m., and so I'll be providing you with the link for that. You can pass it out to the planning board. And then we just have to review these recommendations and provide our concept list to the DEP by 9/1/2022, and then we'll have until 2024 to actually embed. And again, we can still probably make changes to that concept list as we go if there's good reason for not adopting something, so. Any questions on the LID piece? I know it was a lot for, yeah.
Just one question is, so this applies only to the red areas that were pointed out in your map? It isn't out in West Cumberland or Bruce Hill or all these other places, it's just those specific areas. which kind of, Carla, overlap a couple of different zones. So it may be zone, I think you may be correct, Carla, that it may be a zone. We deal this zone-wise rather than within those magic areas rather than try to do something in the geographic.
Yes.
But this
Yes.
was, I thought when I read this, it's a heck of a lot more complicated than everybody kind of thought it was.
Yeah. And we had, this was, the requirement to embed these low-impact development standards in the ordinances only came to the communities in November of 2021. So we've only known about it for, we've only known about it for about 6-7 months now. But we had the foresight to think that something like this might be coming, so we applied for the grant early. Kind of hoping for the best, but planning for the worst, like, oh, if we have to do this, we'll, it was one of the big issues that we were discussing as the DEP was trying to finalize the permit. So, this one is much more straightforward, so, so that's why I kind of did that first. You'll hear more about low-impact development later on. This one will be much more straightforward for you guys, so, and for us. So the erosion and sediment control requirements are, the specific permit language says that the municipality has to create or update an ordinance or other regulatory mechanism that requires the use of erosion and sediment control BMPs at construction sites. And then the part that's new to you is consistent with the minimum standards outlined in an appendix to our general permit. And those standards that we have to embed in the ordinances are basically the Chapter 500 standards for erosion and sediment control, which is a good thing because it's the erosion and sediment control standards that all the developers are designing to when they disturb 1 or more acres of land. So the difference is, so they're already doing this, it's great, but the Maine DEP does not have enforcement authority to do a stop work order. So this requirement has now come down to the municipalities that all of these specifics are gonna be embedded in the town ordinance so that the code officer has better enforcement capability and better ability to do a stop work order is really the intent of this. So there are so many of these that I can't, these standards, I can't go through all of them for you tonight. But generally, the erosion, it's the 1 acre threshold, which is the same as the state standard. The measures have to be in place before construction begins, remain in place throughout construction, and then there has to be adequate and timely maintenance. And I think the adequate and timely maintenance is one of the things that the Maine DEP has been having issues with. So, one of the ways that the erosion sediment control standards handles this at the state level, which will now be at the town level, is that the inspections that are required during construction by a contractor, the contractor themselves has to be inspecting their BMPs, their silt fence, their bark mulch berms weekly before a rain event, after a rain event, and then they have to keep a log. And most of them are not keeping logs, and most of them are not doing these inspections. And kind of, it's hit or miss if somebody shows up at the site and realizes that the BMPs have not been maintained. So this will get locked down a little more tightly now. And then when these erosion and sediment control BMPs need to be repaired, so these are, it's the fine print. The contractor has to initiate upon discovery, complete before the end of the next workday, allow completion within 7 days. You can work with them if you need to give them a little bit longer, and it has to be done prior to any rain event. So, so those are all gonna be a little more strictly enforced, I think, than they have been in the past. The municipality does have a few more inspections that Bill Longley or third-party inspectors are gonna have to do, so those will be up to 4 or 5 inspections per site. I think you guys are already doing more than that, but many communities were not. And then there's also a requirement for a pre-construction meeting, which Cumberland already requires, which is great. Some of the specific BMPs that will be required are like these stabilized construction entrances. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these on a site, but they're basically 2 to 3 inches of crushed stone. It's about 6 inches deep. So if you imagine on the right-hand side here is the disturbed area where all the exposed soil is, and then the left-hand side of this is the roadway. So this crushed stone is designed that as trucks are bringing material in or leaving, they're going to be leaving the sediment in the crushed stone before they get out into the road, where then Public Works might have to do the street sweeping or clean up the catch basins, or, right? So it's a good BMP for.
The doormat for the trucks.
It's the
Yeah.
it's the doormat. I have not heard that before, but yes, that's exactly what it is. So, but it has a specific design to it too, which, it's tipped. And then there's another row of either stone or bark mulch berm that will then, contain the sediment that might run off from the construction entrance. So these are pretty prescribed. This is how the standard details always look on the plans. But it doesn't always get inspected by the contractor the way it does. It does the way it needs to be, or by the municipality, or by the main DEP the way it needs to be. So a little tighter reins on all of this. And again, a very, very important BMP. There'll be a lot of new definitions and fine print that will make things much more specific for everyone. What is permanent stabilization? What has to happen during winter construction when here in Maine, we get rain events on frozen ground, which is partially thawed. So extra BMPs during winter construction. So all that detail will be either embedded or directly referenced by the town's ordinances. And then this project also had recommendations for some optional elements, which we'll go through with the town staff and provide recommendations to the board as to what we ought to embed in the Cumberland ordinances. And then the specific standards that we're going to be looking at, I just wanted to give you a couple quick examples. Like, you guys are great in that this community already has the 1 acre threshold embedded for any kind of minor staff review. So that's great, that's already on your tables. So we don't have to make any changes in that regard. But I took a look at both the site plan review performance standards as well as the subdivision performance standards, and this is the text from the site plan review. So section 22910C, this would be the section that we'll have to update with staff. We'll provide you back with the red line on this. But right now, the standard is pretty, it has some good language, but it's kind of vague. It's nowhere near as specific as the slides I showed you before. So this is text that we will have to update in particular. And then you have a separate set of, soil erosion standards for subdivisions, and that text is also not as specific as it needs to be in it. So a couple of different ways we could do this is we could change both of these paragraphs to just reference Chapter 500 standards. So that could be a nice, clean way to do it. We could also change both of those paragraphs to just reference an appendix, which has all of the standards listed out in it, which is another pretty clean way to do it. So I was thinking those two might be really good ways for you to do it. We will, again, with staff, look at definitions, submittals, make sure everything gets cleaned up and do red lines on everything. But we do have on this one option, if we want to just take those 2 paragraphs and reference Chapter 500 directly, we could do that. We have some good language that's already been approved by the city of Saco. So it was one option I wanted to present to you tonight. And the other one is that we did write a model ordinance for erosion and sediment control. So if you wanted to have a whole nother chapter for erosion and sediment control, we can do that. because there is a model ordinance you could point to and reference instead. But this ordinance, the way we designed this, is we gave it an appendix which actually has most of the standards in it that you need. So you could take those two little paragraphs and just point to the appendix. So one way that we structured the appendix was with all of the detail on the erosion and sediment control standards. And another way that we structured the appendix, we have an alternative appendix that you could, again, point to Chapter 500, but if you want to adopt some optional elements that are a little more strict than Chapter 500, you could just call those out in this appendix, you could say. And that helps the developers to know what the differences are between your town standard and the Chapter 500 standards.
So Carla, my question to you is that, as I say, this looked a heck of a lot more complicated than everybody thought. In your planning department's work plan for next year, I mean, we've not only got this, but we've got this huge mess that we're going to deal with the new zoning ordinances. Has there been additional funds? Because I assume we're going to have some outside help on some of this. If we budgeted any of this stuff, are we doing it in-house, or do we know anything yet on what we're going to do?
Well, as it relates to the stormwater changes, we already budget funds for Christie to work with the town. So that's done. She provides all of the technical expertise, informs Bill Shane and the various departments, Public Works mostly, myself and codes, on what needs to happen. And she'll do that with this, and we will present it to you. That's why I asked the question. I don't see each of you having a lot of specific input on these things. I think it's a lot of what you're already describing, we already do. It sounds like we're just going to be tweaking it a little bit more so that it's easier for Bill Longley to enforce. But we're not going to be reinventing the wheel.
So we have, between Christie and our internal resources, we've got enough manpower and outside consulting to deal with this particular one.
Yes. Mhm.
So at the end of the day, something is going to come to the ordinance committee and then ultimately to us. Is that correct?
I haven't talked about this with Bill Shane. If this is something that goes to the ordinance committee, it doesn't seem like it's a very discretionary ordinance. It's not like we're talking about changing a zone or increasing minimum lot sizes or things that are land use related that would need to go to the ordinance committee, then to the council, and then adopted by the council. I think these are, to me, it's very much a housekeeping thing for work that we already do. So I don't see it as being labor intensive, Peter.
But for as far as the public is concerned, though, I mean, if you're a contractor and looking at this thing, there's more stuff being piled on, and I guess the thing is that what's the vehicle that kind of informs the public and the contractor of all this stuff going on? I mean, it doesn't look to me like it's minor stuff. I mean, it looks like there's some major stuff in there that can't be done just with a wave of a wand without the council or somebody looking at it, I would think, but maybe I don't.
The state DEP is saying we have to do this. We already do, I would say 98% of it. All they're asking us to do now is tighten it up a little bit. The site contractors know all of this, especially the ones that work in Cumberland, Maine. They're a sophisticated group. They all have the appropriate training to know what's required of them, stabilize construction entrances. All of those things are part of a plan that the planning board approves when you approve a subdivision plan, there's a sheet called erosion sedimentation control, and it lays out things like stabilized construction entrances and culverts, and all of those things are already there. And when we have a pre-construction meeting with the developer and his site contractor, Bill Longley and I, sometimes we have Bill Shane sit in if it's a particularly challenging project. We go over all of these things with them. They understand what's required, they understand when they have to let us know that they're doing these things, so we can have an inspector go out there. Usually, we have our town engineer who reviewed the project, so say it's Dan Diffin. He's already reviewed the plans that include the erosion sedimentation control measures. He then, after it's approved, will come to the pre-construction meeting. He will go out at periodic times to inspect the work. So if they know that the erosion and sedimentation control measures are being installed this week, he goes out there and watches to make sure the silt fence is in the right place, and all these things are done correctly. And then they inspect it at periodic basis, like before storm events, after storm events. And invariably, there are failures, and the contractors have to fix them. So I'm not seeing this as a lot of heavy lifting, really. I really not seeing it that way.
But somebody's got to, after you come up with this, somebody's got to approve it. You just can't throw it in the regulations. Does the council do it?
I would assume so. Is that what typically happens? Yeah?
Each town's process is a little different, and Carla, like the erosion sediment control stuff that we have to get done over the next year is going to be very straightforward, and because, like you said, everybody's already doing it, everybody knows it, we're going to embed it in the standards. So I do think we need to write a letter to Bill, I'll get Bill's attention on it, to find out if it has to go to ordinance first and then get embedded.
Right.
But the low-impact development, we definitely need to get his input on also. So that will be a little more involved when we get to the point where we have to embed those. And I'm sure that one will have to go to ordinance committee, so.
Thank you. So it does. I mean, we just can't wave a magic wand that some governmental authority, probably the council, eventually needs to deal with it. And isn't it the standard thing, they waive it by us just to take a look at it, right?
It will have to go through public process and, yeah, just like any other
Okay.
Public
ordinance change,
hearings
yeah.
and public.
Okay.
Much like the
Yeah.
shoreland zoning that we recently adopted, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The verbiage will be blended with our current
Right.
Yes.
ordinance and updated, and then
Yeah.
you assume come to us, and then it becomes law in this town.
Yep.
Thank you.
So maybe these questions are not appropriate for planning board, and so I apologize if I thought your process was that the ordinance changes would come to planning board first, because I did think, that's what I thought when I suggested that I come and do the MS4 update and explain to you what the ordinance changes were gonna be. So maybe that was my bad, but, so I don't know if you guys are they gonna be able to answer these questions, or do we need to just take that step back and go talk to Bill and?
I think we need to pull back and
Yeah.
meet with Bill Shane
Okay, good.
and go from there.
Yeah, I gave him this update about a year ago that we were gonna have to do it, but then
Okay.
I didn't check in with him before I came to you, so I'm sorry if I've confused the process here, but. Yeah, and so those were some of my questions, was, kind of how do we wanna get it done? Should we go urbanized area, only, or implement it townwide? And then we'll do all the red lines and all the detail work behind the scenes, and then
Okay.
come back to whatever the process is, so. So you can ignore this.
Thank you.
But I did, we did have an obligation to come and talk about MS4, and so you'll see some changes coming through. So thank you. Any other questions?
Any other questions of Christie?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I guess we'll leave that to you, Carla and Bill. The only comment I guess I would make is, she showed sort of some optional ways of doing things, and in my own opinion, anytime that we can not repeat verbiage and just have one ordinance refer to the other places.
Right.
So that in the future, we don't have to update the same exact paragraph in 5 places. I find that beneficial. Okay. Anything else before, oh, let's see. Item G, administrative matters, anything? Okay, so item H, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And a second, okay, Bridget, discussion. None. All in favor? Unanimous, okay.
Is that what I said, don't you?
No.
Things
Very
get
good.
complicated when